Hello, beautiful community. We know that authoritarian regimes like to use large scale sporting competitions to generate perceived legitimacy, and we might talk about that as the competition rolls on in connection with the Trump administration. But for now, we gotta say a few things about what a soft power disaster the World Cup is proving to be for Trump thus far, even though we're only just kicking off. We've got really quite worrying statistics across the country on hotel bookings. Hotel bookings in cities that are hosting the World Cup are not objectively down across the board on last year, but they are massively down relative to expectation, often 80-90% down relative to projections. And in some places, they are actually down relative to last year. We have got a drop in European travel to the United States, which is perhaps the surest signal of something that is partly protest, but also partly insecurity about immigration bureaucracy, insecurity about what Trump's America is like, insecurity about logistics. But clearly, it's people who are thinking about stretching to, a special trip to do something they love, and then feeling, well, there's an unlovely taste about this whole thing. And given that, are we going to invest? Are we going to stretch ourselves to go there? Probably not. Let's miss it. There's a lot of people who are missing the World Cup who would have gone had it been happening elsewhere, and who have gone to previous World Cups but are skipping this one. We have a very embarrassing story with the Somali referee who was voted African Referee of the Year, and he was scheduled to referee at the World Cup, and him not being allowed is really quite offensive to football fans all over the world, even Tommy Robinson supporting football fans, because refereeing is really, 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 really hard at the highest level, and football fans know that. And so when you hit a referee, you're hitting the sport, right? Because you're hitting a representative of the sport at its best. And that's going to be offensive to everybody connected with the sport. You've had huge problems coming into the country that the Iranian team have had, that the Iraqi team have had. Some Europeans have had problems getting into the country. So it's not a good feel. Europeans also vicariously empathize with immigrant communities in America who might not feel safe in stadium environments because God knows what ICE is going to do, where ICE is going to hunt for people. So certainly this is feeling bad from a soft power point of view for the United States. Now, one of the questions I get in email correspondence is, should the United States perhaps be banned from hosting the World Cup, given that it started the Iran war? And I don't know how to even begin taking that question practically, right? It's just a non-starter. You can ban Russia, but banning the United States would be so difficult that there's no account of who should do what and how and when and by what mechanisms to bring that result about. So I think that question is a non-question. Of course, as the competition rolls on, Trump will try to smear himself all over it. And that'll mean that we will be talking here or on the main channel perhaps even about how authoritarians take advantage of sporting competitions. What we should say on the other side of that question is that it is a myth generated at the end of the Cold War that hosting the World Cup has liberal or democratic consequences downstream for the country, right? We had Qatar, we had Russia, and you're not seeing democratic consequences. You're not seeing the democratic benefits of Russia's 2018 World Cup. If you look at what's happening both within the country and in Ukraine, there are generally two extreme views you can take about the relation of the World Cup and politics. On the one side, you've got something like Noam Chomsky's view, and Noam's view is roughly, and I don't recommend this view, but Noam's view is roughly that sport is a reservation in which citizens can reflectively engage with the world as a way of distracting them from reflectively engaging with the world politically. So it's a site for distraction, consumerism, false consciousness, some kind of evasiveness that reaffirms an exploitative status quo. That's one pole. The other pole is something like the Jürgen Klinsmann view of World Cups, and that says, look, unless you've got Nazi Germany, you've basically just got to focus on the sport, right? The World Cup in Russia was brilliant, it went really well, everybody loved it, and forget about the politics, right? If it gets really, really extreme, then you've got to do it. And of course, Jürgen Klinsmann himself is very conscious of this because he was growing up in a very, palpably, post-World War II, post-Holocaust Germany. There's a real consciousness of Germany regaining confidence, gaining transparency about its past, showing adequacy about its retrospective sense of itself. Jürgen Klinsmann was born, I'm going to say 1964. And you've got to be somewhere away from these two positions, right? I certainly don't recommend Noam Chomsky's position. I think you can go a bit further than Jürgen's position on Russia, Qatar, and Trump's World Cup in the United States. Now, Zoran Mamdani has been trying to counter this overall atmosphere by making both locals and foreigners feel very, very welcome. And also he's hit out at the Trump administration by pointing out that the United States is a country of immigrants. It's a country of diversity. 6 players in the US team were not born in the United States. So on and so forth. So Trump is American. He is as American as Mamdani and apple pie, but he is not America. America is many, 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 many things. We will talk about how Trump is going to attempt to exploit the World Cup, but meanwhile, we'll just leave our 2 cents here. Our initial pre-World Cup take. Let me just spend a minute talking about football itself, just for fun. You've got Mexico, Canada, and the United States as the hosts. But let me say something about my country, England. We've got a German manager, Thomas Tuchel, and what Thomas Tuchel has decided is that he is not going to make a dish with less than perfect ingredients. And that's meant that he has made a very clear-sighted decision that most managers would not have the confidence to make, and it might not be vindicated in practice, but he's made the decision that England will not be a possession team, that when England get to the quarterfinal or perhaps the semi-final and they do not have the ball because they're playing against a technically superior team, they're not going to have any ability to do anything about that except try to beat them on the break, on the counter-attack. And if they can't beat them on the counter-attack with the players on the pitch, he can bring in more players who will also try to beat the opposition on the counter-attack. And he decided that because he felt that one, um, the right back Trent Alexander-Arnold couldn't do defensively what he needed him to do, and that Cole Palmer and Phil Foden did not have good enough seasons. And almost all managers would have brought at least one of them. But Tuchel has said, if the ingredients are not perfect, I'm not going to try to make that kind of dish. I'm going to make a simple, more modest dish, but from the liveliest and freshest ingredients, and we're going to stick with that. So it's a prioritization of cohesion and a prioritization also of psychological cohesion, because you don't want to have more talented players on the bench than the players who are on the pitch, because the more talented players on the bench are not coming off the best seasons. So if this is going to create tension in the squad, we're not going to have these players there. So he's prioritized harmony, he's prioritized cohesion, and he's prioritized doing what you're trying to do really well. And if that means reducing the ambition of how you're trying to achieve your goals, not the ambition of your goals, but how you're trying to achieve your goals, then so be it. That's my 2 cents on my country. We'll talk very soon. Lots of love, beautiful community.